Good evening and welcome everybody to an edition of our NYC Film Green office hours. My name is Shira Gans and I'm the Senior Executive Director of Policy and Programs here at the New York City Mayor's Office of Media and Entertainment. I'm also the director of our NYC Film Green program that promotes sustainable production here in New York City. A little bit about the Mayor's Office. We're the city agency that supports all the creative sectors in New York City with a focus on permitting on-location film production in the city. So these creative sectors are obviously the soul of New York City, but they're also a huge economic driver. They support over 500,000 jobs and 150 billion in economic output. So we created Film Green to try to support the amazing creative and economic culture that the film industry brings to New York City while also providing resources to help mitigate the environmental impact. Tonight, I'm really excited for this edition, which is our producers roundtable. So a big thanks to Earth Angel for helping us to curate it tonight and for all our amazing speakers. So tonight we're going to talk to experts in the field who've been doing this for decades combined about how you make sure that you integrate sustainable practices into your productions. So without further ado, let's bring on all of our speakers. Hello and welcome everybody. So thank you guys for joining me. It's nice to see all your faces. So I'd just like everyone to introduce yourself. I'll kind of cue you and you can tell us, exactly what you do and what it means to be a producer for you. Because I think that's a term that people don't always necessarily know what it means, or it means different things in different contexts. So Mary Jo, welcome.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, Mary Jo Winkler. I am a New York-based freelance film and television producer. I recently executive produced True Detective Night Country, and I'm also the co-founder and co-chair of PGA Green Task Force, and as well as a co-chair of the DGA Sustainable Future Committee. And I'm going to pass it on to the next person. I mean, we'll talk about producing. It encompasses everything. There isn't anything that we don't touch.
Claudine, please tell us about yourself.
Thank you, Shira. Yes, well, to me, a producer is someone that can get things done and get people together and get them on the same page. That's always what it feels like to me. But yeah, so I've been, I'm naturally an environmentalist, so it was, this was natural for me to bring it into the workplace, and I love doing it because it gets people excited too, because they can see how just a little bit of effort can really mean a lot. So that's a lot of fun doing this.
Thanks. Willy?
Hi, I'm Willy Friedman. I'm a producer, line producer, been working in TV for the last 10 plus years. I guess the way I like to describe it is like someone else has an idea, and then there's got to be a responsible adult who oversees the whole thing. And that's usually my job.
Great. We have a professional, responsible adult. And Joe?
Hi, everyone. Yeah, I'm a line producer. And I think producing is organizing a lot of complex stuff and keeping it all together.
Great. So now that we kind of have a little bit of a baseline of what it means to produce, I'd love to hear from some of you if you'd like to share how you were motivated to incorporate sustainability into your work. I think sometimes for folks, it can feel like there's a barrier that you need to have a particular background or a particular level of expertise, which I don't think is always the case. So I'll start with Willy because I like his story about how he first saw this.
Sure. I was watching Sesame Street with my kid, and I was watching the credits because I'm a producer and I like to watch the credits. And I saw the NYC Film Green logo at the end, and I was like, "Ooh, what's that?" Like, I want that. I work in New York, and I care about sustainability, so I went and looked it up because of Sesame Street. So whoever designed that logo, good job. Caught my attention.
Roxy, yeah, thank you, Roxy, from our team.
Yeah,
great. And
yeah,
Joe, yours dated back a little bit longer.
Yeah, I grew up on an organic vegetable farm in Vermont, so for us, composting was just part of what we did, and not wasting and putting all that stuff back into the soil. So getting into film production and making movies and television shows, to me, that was a natural thing to do, is to not waste, materials and food. And, I've tried to continue to make it a priority. And I think we have great support from all the cast and crew we work with on it.
Great. And then I don't know, Mary Jo or Claudine, is there a thing you want to share about how you got started in this field?
You go first, Claudine.
Okay. Well, I was doing a lot of it in my own life, and also I came up through independent films, tiny little films, and we didn't have a lot of money. So it was like, why do we have little plastic water bottles when I can get a cooler? And why can't we do this? Why can't we do that? And it ended up saving us a lot of money, and it also made people feel good. So I enjoyed it. And then it was, it was simple because I was already integrating in my life, but it's not always simple for everybody if you're not really, that's not your focus. So it feels a little overwhelming. So I always try to do little things so people can, especially on the indie side, because you don't have a lot of support. You're trying to run the movie. So,
and Mary Jo?
I have a similar story to Joe's. My mother owned health food stores in the 70s, and we were a very eco-conscious family. But it cut to 2003. I went to hear an environmentalist speak, and I was incredibly inspired. And I felt like, I had made some changes in my own life that, got me back to my roots of how I was raised. And I literally woke up in the middle of the night one night and went, wait a minute, I'm doing all of this stuff at home. I need to do this at work. And I was budgeting a film at the time, and I went through every department line item in the budget and went, okay, what can we do in this department? What can we do in this department? What can we do in this department? And just started making notes. Started with waste, with garbage, because how many times have you been on a set where everybody's complaining about how much garbage there is and how come everybody's throwing everything away? And this was in the, early 2000s. So people weren't as conscious as they are now. And I just started I went to the director, Curtis Hanson, who I was working with at the time, and said, I'd really like to implement some environmental practices, and would you support me? And he was like, absolutely, unequivocally, yes, let's do it. And I started by talking to department heads and went department by department and just asked to, their thoughts on it. And there was an overwhelming amount of support. People really wanted to do the right thing. They had the same complaints. I was thanked for, oh my God, I can't believe we're finally doing this. So that spurred a kind of every movie after that, I wanted to do better and better and better. And I wanted to raise the bar. And luckily in 2007, I was making a movie called Away We Go with Sam Mendes. And I was approached for that film to be a pilot study on how we could implement sustainability into the industry. So a company study basically gave us an environmental science grad student, and we tried out different things. We got rid of single-use plastic water bottles. We implemented biodiesel. We did all these things, and that to sort of raise the bar. And that film was studied. There was a sustainability report, and the first third-party verified carbon footprint of a film was done on Away We Go. And that report went to the desks of all of the heads of production at the major studios. It was NBC Universal was the company, but after that, the report was circulated. And at the same time, I was starting a committee at the Producers Guild with Lydia Pilcher called PV.
But I'm going to pause you before we get into that. So
anyway, long story short, we wrote a grant and we started committee work and started spreading the word. Yeah.
So I love those answers, because to me, it shows that you can either be inspired from something that's really personal to you about either the way you grew up or something that you aspire to in your career, like you want a certain seal or you want to sort of integrate what your parents instilled in you. And so I think it's just kind of an important message that there's no one right way to do it, and you don't have to be in a particular position to do it. You can just do it for any reason, and the and the impact can be very large. So I want to talk a little bit about what it means to produce in different contexts. So I'm going to start with you, Mary Jo, because when we spoke, you're working on sort of big budget studio productions. And so I think that's a little different than folks who might be working on smaller budget indie productions. So I kind of want to hear a little bit about, start with that and then kind of go to your advocacy education work.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, listen, from that takes, picking up where I just left off, as of 2008, a lot of the studios, we wrote a grant and the studios participated in creating tools for the industry on the Green Production Guide. And by 2010, we were, off to the races with studio support. So, and that, most of the studios and streamers now have sustainability departments.
Right.
And it sort of grew out of that. And those departments, and I don't know, like some people don't know, are not informed about the sustainability department. I think it's gotten better over the years. And what I typically do, first of all, I've been doing this since 2003 and I'm not going to stop doing it. And I think everybody who takes me on as a producer knows that this is what I do. And I make room in the budget for a sustainability department. I work very closely with the studio sustainability people, always sort of pushing the envelope, trying to bring in clean tech, trying to move beyond the low-hanging fruit of getting rid of, single-use plastic and things like that. But and was really able to help like form the sort of tools for the industry. So intuitively just started going, step by step through the setup of a film and now I'm working as a creative producer and I am now going all the way through launch and air and also like premieres and awards and things like that to kind of really bring the sustainability into those other departments. So studios have been, it's been a mixed bag over the years, but they're more supportive now than they ever have been. And if you are on a production and you don't know where to turn, ask your production executive if there is a representative. And there's so much more to talk about, but I don't want to take up all the space. So we can.
Well, then I'll come back to you in a minute about kind of the education you've done. But that's great to hear because, sometimes you hear that it's a struggle to get the buy-in, but it sounds like at a certain level, the buy-in's there and there's room to kind of push. So on the other side, Claudine, I know when we spoke, you have a little more experience in the indie world, or that's where you are working mostly. So can you talk to us a little bit about what's that like and how that's different and how you kind of get it done?
I think COVID was great for sustainability because all of a sudden now it's not a problem to do paperless productions and different things like that. So that was exciting to me. I mean, similar to Mary Jo is that, when people hire me, they kind of know the same thing, right? So I want to bring at least some of that there and, work with the budget that we have to incorporate what we can do and depending on who's involved. And I think that's, part of it, like no matter what size production you are and you can do something. And, Mary Jo, I got really lucky when I was involved and Mary Jo brought me on as a chair for the Green Committee for Producers Guild. So I got to really learn a lot from her and all the pioneering that she's done. Thank you, Mary Jo, for all of that. And, things like the Green Production Guide, what a great tool. So anyone on this call that's like, how do I start? What do I do? Great place. There are those tools out there. And then talking to other producers and networking with producers that, focus on sustainability, because I just think you have to take baby steps with people. Especially if you have a single financier writing you a check and they have no idea what you're talking about. And so you just have to show how that is going to help the production overall and really save money, but also elevate the workspace that people are in.
And do you have any perspective?
If I could just add two other resources, because they are very intuitive to the process, is the DGA Pro Tips is open source. You can Google it and it's all there and it's by department. It's DGA, categories, but if you go through it, it's very intuitive. And the PGA now has a toolkit on their website that is open source. So between those 3 resources, there's a lot of tools for the industry, and it makes it a lot easier to have that guidance.
Thanks. And so I guess also, Claudine, in the context where, I often hear people say, oh, you should hire an eco consultant. If you don't have money for that in your budget, what are some of the strategies that you employ in order to get it in there?
Because I knew how to do it. I mean, I've done some hybrid models on shows where, Emily O'Brien from, Earth Angel worked with us to set up, and like I've empowered our team to be tracking. And so we kind of did a hybrid model, but working with the PA, also the mayor's office is talking about sustainability with their PA staff. So it's really great to get somebody that's involved in that can help. But I think, the biggest thing that I've learned from crews is when we show the report of what they did and how it impacts things, they're like, oh my God, this is amazing. I want to do this on my next show. So it's really exciting to see people get excited about it. And then they start saying, well, I'm going to do this at home. Why am I not doing this at home? So it really kind of spreads out. And I think the biggest fear for a smaller film is that it's going to cost a lot of money. But, you can basically say, hey, you always have a PA in location, so why can't they be, weighing and managing compost and recycling versus just garbage? Like, so there's ways to find places in the budget where you can not really add a lot to the bottom line, but it's just like these subtle little things you can do.
Right. And so I guess to kind of get a little more into the nitty gritty, I know the budget is sort of something that you guys are responsible for. It's where you kind of get to make these decisions. So Joe, you had kind of mentioned some interesting things you do to advance your focus on EVs and some other strategies too.
Yeah, I mean, well, I just Claudine started to get into a key point, which is that sometimes even if the budget's a constraint, you're saving money by not by having less pounds of garbage that goes to a landfill. Some of these are not tangible up front, but they actually do save money. And yeah, I mean, in my personal life and then at work, another way to save money is not spend it on fuel, and yes, there's charging costs, but right now it's a lot less expensive to charge a car than to fill it up with gas. And in New York City, you're spending money on fuel when you're sitting in traffic. You're not pulling that charge down on an EV. So yeah, that's what I've been working on more over the last couple of years, is really pushing to increase the use of EVs or alternate fuel. There's some exciting stuff happening with hydrogen fuel now, and the kind of next phase that I'm looking forward to seeing the tech and the practicalities develop is being able to have actual trucks or some of the larger vehicles we use not powered by oil, by fossil fuel. So yeah, on most recent production, I really made a push to get as many EVs and hybrids as possible. And for me, part of that process is talking to all the vendors, the people you're talking to anyway, negotiating a deal in the beginning of a show, what have you, to say, what do you got? We're going to be renting a dozen vehicles, more on a bigger production. So can you line up some EVs? If you just call and say I need an EV, oh, it may not be available right away, but you get that fleet going on a bigger show. We had trailers with the best units, the batteries instead of generators, and asking the truck vendors, anyone you could talk to say, what do you have that's a more environmentally friendly is key.
And I think you had told me, though, you struck a deal with some of the garages that you were using.
Oh yeah, I mean that was it every bit helps, but like charging in New York City, the infrastructure is not there yet. We needed a bunch of parking garage spaces, and so we worked that into our monthly rates was to include charging for those EVs that we had, and you'd be surprised a lot of New York City garages have chargers. So um, you know that is another cost saving thing, and also I got our stage. We worked with Broadway stages, and they put in additional charging ports for us. You know, which also helps.
Yeah, I think this is kind of an important point of that you don't know what you can get until you ask, either right about your budget or that your vendors might not know. I think, a lot of the environmental shifts. I remember I used to do food policy in a previous job, and I was like the annoying person who asked, about the childhood of the chicken from like the waiter, and everyone thought I was insane. And then it's like, okay, enough people started asking that, and now it's like it's already on the menu. You don't have to ask that question anymore because there's enough demand. So I think, we just had this experience around helping to get renewable diesel into a couple gas stations. And I think it's like having those conversations, letting folks know that there's a market and helping them to overcome the anxiety about, is this product going to be utilized? So Willy, I wanted to hear a little bit from you about your experience working on Netflix shows and how the budget works there. And we talked about.
I'll just start saying, I came up working on indies also and working on kind of lower budget projects. And just, I think it's worth mentioning because, it's always thinking like, how can I do this? How can I fit it into the budget? How can I make it work? And I think it's worth saying it's always worth doing something rather than nothing. So even if you can't do everything, even if you can't green an entire production, get your whole fleet electrified, one electric car is better than none. And whatever the one thing that you can do will make a difference, does make a difference. And again, the more you do that one thing or two things or three things, the more it starts to become normal, routine, and part of everyone's kind of way that they just do business.
And I think what I heard from Joe too was sort of like the planning of it too, right? Like putting everything through that lens of sustainability and making a plan for it in advance and setting achievable goals, like you said, Willy, is like that is key. But then to do it early, not wait until you're 3 weeks out and everybody's in chaos. I think that's an important point, and I sort of heard that from you, Joe, where you had a lot of advanced planning in
I mean
world.
Yeah, and look, we did and we didn't. As this was on a production that got very busy very fast. A period movie, but we did have a lot of vehicles, and it's just a matter of identifying, just as you might identify, oh, we're going to need a lot of additional scenic support or whatever department. We should start lining that up. It was like, hey, we're gonna have a lot of vehicles, so as we go around, we start getting these rates and everything. Like, what do you have? What can you provide?
And so, yeah, I heard that a lot when I talked to you all in advance of this, of just starting through I liked how you said, Mary Jo, everything kind of through this lens and having to think about it at the beginning, not at the end. And this has come up kind of in all of the Film Green office hours. Like if you want to, have somebody pick up all your materials at the end of when you're striking, like you can't wait a day before. You have to kind of think about that in advance. So Willy, it was interesting to me to hear about some of the line items put into your budget from a company like Netflix that focus on decarbonization, and then how you use that to meet your other sustainability goals.
Yeah, I was going to say, so like Netflix has been great. I'm working on a show with them now. We filmed 2 seasons of it in New York, and they have a sustainability department. Thanks, Mary Jo. And their focus is primarily on decarbonization and on emissions. And my introduction to sustainable production was through Earth Angel, like after I saw that Film Green logo. And so I was kind of more used to tracking solid, physical waste on set, compost, reducing single-use plastics, paper, all of that. And so to kind of come into the show with Netflix and be like, oh, you have an entire department and you're focused on this, but you have a total blind spot on the other side. And so it was really helpful for some parts, and then I was able to do some parts. And they have a line in all of their budgets which is called carbon offset. And basically they give you, you know, X $1,000 a week or whatever it is to put against clean tech and green tech. And so if I'm, you know, I rented 3 trailers, and if the solar trailer is $300 more per week, I can write off the difference in cost against this line. And that's great. And so I did that. And then being able, you know, similarly, like I think we had, and I'll use this to what I was saying before. I tried to electrify my fleet of vehicles for this show, and it just wasn't possible. My crew didn't have places to charge at home. There were, you know, availability issues. But instead of saying, oh, well, I guess I'm screwed, like I can't do it, I was like, well, can I at least get my unit van electrified? And we did. And so like we had that one. And then so it was actually funny, between season 1 and 2, I had like a little postmortem with Netflix, and they were pushing electric vehicles because that is a huge part of decarbonization, but they didn't have chargers at the stage that they had just built in Brooklyn. So I said, hey, could you please put those in? And they did. They listened. So between season 1 and season 2, there were now chargers there. And I said, look, because you guys put these chargers in, I can now get an electric vehicle in my fleet and have it there. And so, you know, part of the way that worked is I needed 2 unit PAs so that they could go in shifts and they could trade off, because the charging was 8 hours and the way that, but because I had these other offsets in my budget, I was able to afford a 2nd unit PA. And so, you know, even though Netflix wasn't going to pay for that unit PA directly, money is fungible, right? And so if I have less cost over here, and if I have a priority to, you know, make this happen, I was able to kind of make it work. I also, again, because they weren't big on composting, I had to push that side of it. But they really worked with me and they were great. Like we set up composting at the office because they didn't have that, and they were happy to do it, but I had to push and I had to say, okay, like you guys have a sustainability department, you care about this, but there's no compost at the office. So let's do that. And then I have to say, it was really cute. They bought like the tiny compost bins for a single person for a production office of 50 people. And I had to be like, well, actually, I think it's a little bigger. But, you know, it takes time. And
sure. So, Mary Jo, you had kind of talked about, I mean, it sounds like an important thing is just being nimble and dynamic and kind of looking at where things can be shifted, but also having these conversations. And so, Mary Jo, I know you said when you started, you kind of went like department by department, and then it also led you to create these, the PGA Green Guide and all these different tips. I don't know if you have any insight or advice to folks who are tuning in on how to.
The biggest piece of advice is to really start as soon as department head comes on, have the conversation. And really, I mean, starting with the creative team, with the production designer, the director, the production designer, the DP, you know, and making those early decisions. And I mean, there's a lot of things you can do that don't cost money, which is look at your schedule and consolidate your locations and move as little as possible and stay in one city. And, you know, there's a lot of planning. So starting early, talking to everybody, and then messaging often, like continue the communication and message to the crew. And I mean, now I do, you know, we do sustainability meetings that are just dedicated to sustainability. And some of the studios have started doing that too, where they're, you know, where some studios will have a kickoff production meeting. They're now doing kickoff sustainability meetings. So that communication, that early communication, but then also really making sure you keep it up and informing the crew of the wins and the things that you're doing and all the good things you're doing. Because like Claudine said, people feel really good when they're doing the right thing. And they also want to work in a clean environment. So when you inform and educate the crew on what you're doing, it inspires people to keep going. And I have had so many crew members and, you know, come up to me with ideas, you know, and I ask for ideas because it's like, if there's a new piece of tech that we should be looking at, if there's, you know, another way of doing it, let's, you know, let people participate in it and share with them the success, share with them the stats, you know, and I think, you know, it's a series of also micro meetings, like with energy, you know, a big thing you can do to save money and to save wasteless carbon emissions is to right size your generators. Traditionally, there have been studies done where 80% of diesel generators are running at 20% capacity, which means that we're overspending and overusing and emitting unnecessary emissions. So there's very specific things that you can target that will bring the cost down. And those are conversations that you have to have with your DP and your gaffer and your transportation team, right? And same thing with like equipment, LEDs, implementing things that use less energy. It's just having a series of meetings to kind of go, what can we do in your department? And
And can I ask, in that framing, do you find that it's helpful to name it as a sustainability thing, or to sort of say, hey, I noticed that you're running this at 20%. Is there a way to bring this cost down with
no,
not?
because I don't really know, like I'm not paying attention to the capacity, like how much they're running. I'm asking them to take a look at their lighting package and make sure that they're not, that's their job to figure out what the energy is that they need to use. So it's an upfront conversation of, are you aware that
Right.
traditionally this is what happens in our industry? And one other thing I wanted to just go back to with that Claudine brought up about like departments, if you don't have money for a sustainability supervisor, I mean, I try to staff on a bigger film or television series, a sustainability supervisor, that somebody that's high level that can really resource and really troubleshoot. And then on set, people who can help the crew manage and organize. And then hopefully you have somebody at a studio who can also help you with high level things. Like I know Netflix has regional managers that are amazing because they will source clean energy, and that's a huge.
Yes.
They
help sourcing EVs. They help.
Yeah.
Also, I just sorry to interrupt, but one of the things that they did that was really great is they worked really hard to socialize new tech. So they got a battery generator and they were like, let's bring this in. And I was like, we cannot, for us, that would have been adding a Teamster, adding a vehicle to carry that thing around. And I was like, we can't do that. He was like, well, what if we just bring it to set for a day so that your team of electrics can see it, learn how to use it, so that the next time they're on a job, it won't be the first time they've seen it. And I was like, yes, please. So like they're very interested in helping out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But just going back for a second, if you don't have money for a staff, talk to your departments and see if they will assign somebody per department to keep an eye on sustainability and to be your communicator, because that really, and again, it's about engagement. And when you're successful and you're sharing with them what's happening, it inspires people for sure.
Sure. And then maybe Claudine, you could talk a little more about kind of as a barrier managing overwhelm on a show or on a production, and how you kind of help people get over that hump, either new tech or something new they have to do, and some of the strategies you use.
Yeah, I mean, just to kind of go from what Mary Jo and Willy were saying, is that talking to the department heads and like even finding out what they feel limitations are. I remember it was like 10 years ago talking to my sound mixer. I was like, why can't we use reusable batteries? And he's like, well, they die all the time. So I was like, well, can we try some if we have, so just taking that baby step with them, and now it's gotten so much better, so just finding out what people are afraid of. And like Mary Jo said, like your crew will then say, well, maybe I will think about this differently, or, hey, maybe I can offer something up that way. And then the other thing too about right now saving money is because unfortunately production is not where it was. So a lot of the vendors are willing to do like, I'm getting quotes right now for trailers and solar trailers and stuff. And now it's all of a sudden, okay, this is the same price as the traditional trailer. So there's ways right now to, get opportunities to try new things that could be similar to what it would cost if you didn't use those things. So, that's helpful. But I think, it's changing a lot. I feel like people are embracing it more because they're seeing it over and over again, especially because the studios are embracing it. And, I do studio work too, and it's so great to have support and have it mandated, because then it's kind of like that's how it has to go. But
Right.
you attract people that are interested in, doing the right thing when you when you live this way. So I've noticed that over time, the people that come on the smaller budget productions, they've already been doing that, and they want to contribute in any way that they can.
Yeah, well, you had kind of talked about that. 'Cause sometimes I hear about, challenges with certain departments or people are super busy, they don't want to adopt something new. But you were working on a show with a younger crew, and what was that
Yeah,
experience?
I tend to work on like comedies in Brooklyn, and it's I've been lucky to work with like a younger crew that's environmentally friendly. And it's like I remember the first time we did composting on a set, I think in 2016, it was a big lift. Not everyone was composting then, and it was like people were like, why do I have to do extra work right now? Compared to working this past year, like everyone's composting. Thank you, mayor's office. But it's like that has become a normal part of life. And so I did, not only did I not get any pushback, it seemed like a thing that everyone was expecting. They were like, where's the compost? Where should I do this? How, making sure that they have the right stuff. And it's not everyone. I still found myself, fishing a few things out of the wrong bin here and there. But yeah, I like, again, I think talking to people early and seeing what works for them and what Claudine just said, like what they're afraid of, some of those fears will be logical and you can't overcome them. And you have to say, okay, well, we can't do anything about that this time. And some of them you can overcome. And so, again, I think, at least in New York, in my experience, working with a pretty hip young crew, people want to do it. They want to help. They want to do it right. They want to, again, they are like living this way in their life. And so everyone knows production to be incredibly wasteful sometimes. And so anything people can do to feel a little better about that, I think they're really game for.
Willy, can I ask how the best unit went over with in terms of the DP or gaffer or whomever was looking at it? Did they think it could work for lighting?
Yeah, I think the thing that we all came to is something that you actually mentioned before. It's once these units start getting onto the trucks, because having an extra thing that you need to tow around is cumbersome. But if that unit was on one of our trucks, if it existed as the generator on a truck, I would 100% do it. And that's, what a lot of the people were kind of saying as well. We had great success with the volt stacks, like the little mobile batteries. We use those a lot.
Yeah.
That was a great example where my DP was hesitant at first because she was like, listen, I just need power. I need to never lose power. If I lose power, even if you're telling me, oh, it's fine, let's take a risk. If I lose power, everyone is going to look at me. So I can't do that. And it was that same thing of, let's just try it. Let's start with it powering Video Village. Like, how can we? And I remember we ended up shooting a scene on the subway, and being able to carry your generator into a subway car is something you never could have done with a diesel generator. And all of a sudden we had all these converts on our set, and now everyone was like, okay, how many volt stacks are we getting? And so, yeah, we had pretty success. But again, the bigger units, I think we're seeing integration is still like a step behind where
it's a great point. I think I was introduced to the battery units doing like an action unit on boats, and our gaffer actually said, these guys have these battery units, and we don't have to deal with all the trying to put a putt generator on a boat or in the subway, as you said. And now it's become de rigueur on the subway, so hopefully people get accustomed to that. Generally, they work as well or better than another type of power.
Well, so we've talked a little bit about kind of the on-set education that just happens as people get more familiar. I was wondering, Mary Jo, and I know Claudine too, if you could talk a little more about the official efforts you guys have made in creating educational tools through PGA and DGA, and a little bit about kind of like that journey, how that came about, how you get a guild or an entity to buy in, and then just to give folks an idea of what some of those resources are.
Yeah, I mean, with the PGA, it was really easy. I mean, it was a sort of happenstance in a way. I had been, I was living in Los Angeles when I first started greening film sets, and then I moved to New York, and I literally ran into Lydia Pilcher on the street, and we had lunch, and I told her what I was doing. She's like, we should start a committee, and we need to educate producers. And we really started like grassrootsy with, panel discussions and like, this is what is possible. And it just kind of started to grow and germinate from there. And like I said, we wrote a grant and got a funding from the major studios to put together a toolkit for the industry that was Green Production Guide. And
was that just something you decide, like, was there a grant opportunity, or you were like,
yeah,
hey,
I
they should give
mean,
us money and we're just going to write
no,
them?
we Lydia and Katie Carpenter and I just went, the studios actually came to us because I
Hmm.
think they at the time they couldn't really all be under one umbrella. They're in competition with one another.
Right.
And they were like, this is amazing, this work that's being done, and we feel like we want to bring it into our productions.
Oh,
So
wow.
how can we work together to create the tools together? And we did a lot of, work on that. Since then, what has kind of transpired though, which is interesting, is that a lot of unions and guilds have taken a deep interest in sustainability and started forming their own committees. And when it took a while to get the DGA to kind of buy in to,
Okay.
for years I'd been going to like ADUPM meetings going, hey, I want to tell you about what I'm doing. I think
Right.
Claudine, you and I did something, and it was like blank stares, and we were like, does anybody want to do this? And I know Joe was probably there, and he was like, yeah, I'll do it. But we tried just getting the admin to kind of buy into it was difficult. But listen, it's sad, but the reality is, as the world has changed, we saw a window. So Lydia and Todd Holland and I put together a proposal to form, before Tommy Shalami left office. He called me and he said, I know you've been doing this for the PGA. This is the last thing I want to do before I leave office. We need to start a committee. So Todd Holland and Lydia and I put together a proposal and took it to Leslie Linklater, and they approved a committee. And then we were like, well, what do DGA members need? It's management, it's directing, it's creative, it's management. And so we co-authored together a comprehensive, we call it the pro tips. And it's soup to nuts creative. We did a unit on climate storytelling. And that's another thing that's important to talk about. That doesn't necessarily mean you have to be the writer writing a climate story, though we do need more climate storytelling. And I've sort of made it for the rest of my years at working in film and television, I will only work on things that have a component with climate storytelling in them. But there are simple things that everybody can do in every department to promote like positive on-screen behavior. Get rid of reusable stuff. Only show, get rid of single use. Only show reusable things. Have a character who's a solar panel installer. Put characters in EV and hybrid vehicles. There's a lot of stuff that everybody as a crew member, we all work in creative capacities, and you can make those suggestions and you can make those decisions and have those conversations with your art department and your prop department and your, costume department and all of that. So it's really evolved over the years. And my hope is, what I would love to see more of is is training. And I'd love to see sustainability become part of contract services, just like sexual harassment and just like safety, because we are at risk, and it, as evidenced by the fires in Los Angeles, we are in a global climate crisis. It is here to stay, and our livelihoods could very well be at risk. So we emit a lot of emissions. So it's incumbent upon all of us to do what we can in our industry to bring those emissions down and to rethink our systems processes.
Thanks. So maybe, I don't know, we will either circulate, or Mary Jo, if you have them, you can put them in the chat, like a link to some of those tools. And then, so this is NYC Film Green. I always like to take a little bit of time during these segments to talk about, what's unique about shooting here in New York City, and what are some of, we like to focus on the positive, but as I always say, we're New Yorkers, so we can kvetch too with an eye towards solutions. But what are some of the things that you find help facilitate that lens of sustainability when you're working in the city? Maybe Joe, I haven't heard from you as much.
Well, I mean, look, yeah, I mean, New York City's great because it's public transportation is so easy, and you can walk, you can bike, you can get around. And I will say, you can find filming locations that are accessible, in the same way. Other than that, I mean, yes, New York City is composting. They finally got residential composting going and making that available on street corners. So that makes a big difference.
Actually, that was an interesting point that you brought up because it reminded me of Claudine. When you and I spoke, you talked about one benefit of indies is that you're not building as much sets because you're always sort of on locations. And is there anything unique about that with New York that kind of facilitates greening?
Yeah, I mean, we don't have as much waste because, depending on how you build, I mean, certain people that have sustainability departments or on the bigger shows, they're smart about it, right? So we're just physically going to locations. So like Mary Jo said, when we're doing our scheduling, it's like, let's try to stay at one place for 5 days instead of moving the truck so we can save, gas and tolls and all that stuff and not be burning emissions. And, the thing I think what's great about New York City in regards to sustainability is a tight network of people in New York. And so when we're cleaning up a production and having these different things, like there's just this networking that goes on and, hey, we need some of this stuff. And hey, we're doing this show. And I just feel like there's a good network of people that help each other kind of repurpose things and do things like that. So
I love that.
I'll say another thing that New York has in droves is talent. Actors, directors, crew. Like I remember looking
producers.
Yeah. A couple. I remember
government
looking
workers
at a sustainability report and seeing how disproportionately weighted flights were, like how horrible they are for emissions, and to look at a show and be like, oh, I can find any character actor I need in New York City right here without a flight from LA. And again, same thing for crew, for directors. I think that's a wonderful thing that New York has going for it.
I love that. You should come
The
work
other
for
thing
us
I'll
here.
say about sustainability on the streets of New York when you're doing it is that the community is seeing it. And, I was on a movie years ago called Premium Rush. It was all on a bicycle in New York City. It was, we were shooting weekends on the Upper West Side, and we were burning out the neighbors were like, okay, enough already, but oftentimes they would walk by and see us sorting our garbage and see that we had very little waste. We were all outside. It was contemporary film. I mean, George Patsos built he had an electric car towing our bike rig. I mean, it was kind of amazing. It kind of saved us a few times from neighbors getting upset with us. And, and so it's very visible. And I think it's important for communities to see.
Yeah, one of the biggest neighborhood impact issues is generators running in a residential neighborhood, right? That's one of the largest sorts of complaints that the mayor's office gets, I think. And so if you've got those battery-powered generators, you're not spewing fumes, you're not making loud noise. So that is another major kind of plus for the community.
And Shira, just to kind of go on what Willy said, is that you're right, like part of working in New York, especially in the indie space, is like you don't want to bring anyone in because you don't have to, from cast and crew, and you save a lot of money when you do that. So you're environmentally friendly, but you're saving money.
Well, and the carbon emissions, it's startling how much transportation fuel, air transport, all are
even hotels and things like that, right?
Emitters. The other thing is tie in as much as you can. We used to tie in all the time in New York, and I think we need to bring that back because that is a really easy way to cut your emissions.
And why aren't you doing it anymore, do you think? Or
it's a good question.
Yeah, I thought it was sort of hard to.
No, it's a good question. I'm not sure I can answer that right now.
Okay. Let's tie in. Someone asked. That's when you plug into the grid instead of using a generator.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
I'll also say another mayor's office thing that's been helpful is it used to be nearly impossible to leave your trucks overnight on location. and that has changed. So that's been really good because that, again,
great.
saves a lot on emissions and, all of that stuff.
I love this. It's like free promotion for New York City, which of course is the best city, but so I guess I want to ask quickly, Mary Jo, to kind of take us to the future a little bit, because you were just shooting in Iceland, right? Where you were saying it's like a different vision of what it means to be green. So could you just kind of like paint us a picture of what a production could look like?
I was incredibly inspired, working in a country that was run on 100% clean energy. 63% is geothermal, and the rest is hydroelectric. The EV vehicles are part of their culture. We rented almost 50 EV vehicles. We saved 15,000 gallons of gasoline from ever being put in a vehicle. They were very open to innovation. We brought in an electric battery that acted like a generator that ran all of craft service and catering. And anytime we were tied into a clean energy grid.
Amazing.
So for me, like, the clean energy transition would be the biggest gift of a future, but also all the steps we're all taking in renting those EVs, fighting for charging stations, even starting with renewable diesel is a start, right? And I think that our business has to just keep going, regardless of what's going on in the political spectrum. I started greening film sets in the Bush administration in 2003. Nobody, and I did I would also recommend to everybody, if you ever have a chance to do Al Gore's climate reality training, I did it in 2010. It was one of the most inspiring trainings that I did, and it really it inspired me to keep going. And I think regardless of what's happening, industry will prevail. Like, if we create the need for it, the prices will go down. We need to create the demand, and the price will go down. And I think that the biggest thing is fossil fuel burning. This is the thing that's gonna, make or break us. So I think we all have to work hard to make that a priority.
And so I guess before we kind of open it up to questions, if folks have them, you can be putting them in the chat. Just, when you guys think about the future, I guess the trajectory you've kind of described has been positive, right? It used to be like people didn't know it, they didn't want to do it, you had to fight the studios. Now it's like Willy already has a line in his budget for decarbonization. Like, nobody gives Mary Jo any problems. Like, Joe's getting free charging. So I don't know, when you guys look to the future, which, cannot always feel so secure in certain moments, like, what do you guys think about where this is going, this industry, or specific things you guys are working towards or you want to incorporate more? I don't know. Any thoughts about trends you think are going to be coming? Like, I hadn't heard anyone talk about hydrogen energy yet, so that was interesting from Joe. I don't know. I'll kick it to you, Joe.
Yeah, no, I think I'm looking at getting to those, where Iceland is now. More use of BESS units and electric powered vehicles, but being open to fuel sources that are, hydrogen is happening. I mean, I think we're getting closer to fusion energy. It's like this kind of new technologies are going to continue to grow, expand, and be successful in the marketplace. So as these technologies improve, it just gets much easier and even cheaper than it already is to be green. So I think that's exciting.
Okay. Anyone else? Willy?
I think the thing that I'm excited to see, and that I do think is coming more, is just more corporate investment in this. I think when the studios actually put some money behind these ideas, that's when you get the largest lift. Like, the fact that Netflix has a sustainability department is great, but Claudine, you were talking about the whisper network of indie producers and crew, and like, if you can imagine if there was a location for each studio where you could bring office supplies and used clothes, production design stuff, whatever, I guarantee you that stuff would get picked up and used and reused. And there's been a few places that have existed in New York that have kind of done that independently. But if you had some kind, and again, I'm not just, it can be on any of it, whether it's EV, emissions, power, whatever, when you get actual buy-in from the studios, which I think they have bought in, and I'm talking about now actual investment in making everything better.
Well, I think they're seeing the efficiencies in a lot of things. And the other area that's really interesting to look at is material use and materials. I feel like there's a lot of innovation happening in that realm in terms of alternatives to styrofoam and alternatives, and I think that innovation will continue. And I also, the other thing is just, it's an approach thing, but is to really look at, your material use. And I know that there are a lot of art directors and production designers who are really, steeped in the space. I think Anu Schwartz is on this in the audience.
He was a speaker at one of our office hours.
He really kind of went deep into circularity and systems thinking. And, and by the way, as a producer, when you're turning one set into another set and you're not throwing away that lumber or trying to find a place to recycle that, that reuse is super important. And I will down effect, because you don't have to pick up more lumber. You don't have to, have to burn more carbon emissions to go get more supply, so it affects everything.
And I think we all do that, but if there were a way for studios to subsidize that, because as you said, it is a cost-saving measure, but instead of just my 3 sets that I have, when those are done, if those go into a studio or into some sort of system where they can really be used and reused by other productions beyond just the couple of people who I know who I'm calling. I think that's a...
Well, I will plug for a second.
Is putting together space as well. Yeah.
I'll plug, we subsidize that. So we underwrite a few positions at Materials for the Arts, which runs out of the city's Department of Cultural Affairs. And so we've underwritten 2 positions that are focused, and they're a resource recovery, circular economy organization, but 2 positions focused just on resource recovery in film and television production. So they'll actually come to a sound stage and they'll do like a kind of a flash sale, a liquidation event. So their members are teachers, arts nonprofits, and other city agencies. So they'll
great. I've used them.
Yeah. So you can actually, if you plan ahead, you can contact them and then they'll send folks out, and that also reduces some of the trucking because they'll try to get rid of most of the stuff on location. And then what they can't move from one of those liquidation events, they'll bring back to their warehouse in Long Island City. So anyway, Claudine, what are you looking forward to in the future?
Yeah, I mean, I think just what everyone else is saying is that as technology and there's new innovative ways to do things or new tech that comes out, I think, and what Willy was saying, he had a younger crew. I think mixing the younger generation with the older generations and having that in your crew base, we're all expanding always. And I think, all the natural disasters that have been happening, I mean, just LA alone, it's like people are rethinking some things and how to focus on them. So I think that's just going to continue to expand and people are going to be attracted to new ways to do things. So that will continue this movement. And definitely, like, what Mary Jo was saying, she's got to work in a place that, is kind of like utopia, right? And it exists and it's working. And so it means that everyone can apply it to everywhere. It's just going to take mindset and time and buy-in.
Then I guess before we wrap up, for something like PGA or some of these other organizations, I mean, is there information you can share with folks who want to get involved, or any other kind of, you mentioned that certain unions have their own green committees, but are there any other communities or resources or sort of instructions you might have for how people can tap into that community a little more?
Well, I would encourage everybody to go to the pro tips and to the Producers Guild Sustainability Toolkit right away, because there's a lot of resources in there.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And you can see we've listed in the pro tips all the union and on PGA all the unions that have sustainability committees. I mean, you have to be a union member to tap into those, but you'd be surprised, you know, how much is going on. And the PGA started an interguild alliance, so we have quarterly meetings with you know, with all of the unions that are participating, and really it's like a groundswell of interest and movement in that I've never seen before.
That's awesome. Anyone else? Any other ooh, let's see, someone's asking a question. Is there any ever can you send over to crew acknowledging yeah, I think, you know, sorry. People are kind of asking about, okay, I currently work as an eco rep on sets and often find pushback or lack of trust in the work of making sets green, such as composting and reusable energy, as well as using plastic alternatives such as PLA. Okay, well, yes, I think we've answered that. Yes, I think like a big theme, the question was about how do you kind of address pushback? I think it's sort of, as we've discussed, talking to people early, getting buy-in, just kind of getting people comfortable. So I want to just,
I also think education, you know, you can throw some stats at people, you can, you know, I mean, post things at the craft service table, you can, you know, you can talk to your producers and your production managers about maybe messaging, doing a, you know, a bulletin on synchronized to like, you know, to inform people of why we're doing what we're doing.
Yeah, and also I think getting buy-in from higher up, like if your cast, if your EPs, showrunners, whoever are into it too, that does tend to trickle down as well.
right, sort of getting everyone on board. I think an interesting thing is always like signage too, and how do you use graphic images and not just text to kind of distill that. I love that the conversation, there's one person who sort of came up with the iconography for the UN Sustainable Development Goals. It's like there's so many goals, and how do you message that in a way that people don't glaze out and then know, like, and so I think, you know, I think we've all had that experience where you're at maybe on a set or you're at a restaurant and you're trying to figure out like, is this landfill, is this whatever, and there's no, when the signage isn't clear, it causes confusion, but I know that's a good way to message that. So I want to thank you guys so much. I also want to tell all of our listeners who I guess aren't on anymore, but we do record this and we will distribute it if you've already signed off. This doesn't help you, but if you wanted to re-listen or to share it with the rest of your community, we do record these and we will distribute them. And I want to thank all the panelists. You guys were awesome. These can't happen, obviously, if you guys don't donate your time and be generous with all your experience. So a big thank you to everyone. And I look forward to seeing you guys. March 4th will be our next Film Green office hours. So stay tuned for information about that.
Thank you, Shira.
Thanks for
Thank
having
you,
us.
everyone.
All right,
Thanks,
bye.